8. What do you value? The only thing to give up on in life is giving up. A few years ago, a couple was involved in a hostile family litigation that had been dragging on for more than 2 years. One of the lawyers brought an application under the Family Law Act for the appointment of a mediator, which in itself is a creative negotiation tactic. The 2 lawyers nominated several mediators, and I was selected. The 2 lawyers were present for the first mediation session, but I held the second session alone with the couple. It was obvious that they did not trust each other, especially after such acrimonious and expensive litigation. What values do I wish to live by, and are my actions consistent with those values? The father was deeply depressed over the breakup and the mother's departure from the house with the children and the assets. The mother was also distressed and in fear, and was now living with her parents. Despite their hostility towards each other, it was important to find their common ground as a basis to start the mediation. I sensed that they both loved their children, and on that they both agreed. In fact, it was the first point on which they could agree. What could I do or say next to encourage the couple to negotiate? In mediation terminology, we were in what is known as the dark moment of the mediation, when even the mediator is unsure of the next step. The situation was deadlocked and it seemed all channels of communication were broken. I decided the only way to restart the dialogue was to ask a question, although I had no idea what that question would be. I turned to the woman. "I want to ask you a question," I began. "Is that okay with you?" I still didn't know what I was going to ask her, but I trusted that I'd think of something. And then the words came to me. "What values do you live by?" I asked. To this day I don't really know what prompted me to ask that particular question. "I'm a Christian," she said. The man interrupted and complained that all of that religious stuff was nonsense, and added that the children were being misled. It was a moment of truth. "What values do you live by?" I asked him. "People live and die. That's it," he said simply. Silence. In litigation training, young lawyers are told, never ask a question for which you don't know the answer. In mediation, however, I have found the opposite to be true. So without any idea how the father would respond, I said to him, "How you resolve your conflict will be the only real education your children will have in solving problems in life, so what values would you like your children to have?" He began listing values and ideals that he would be proud to see in his children. I could hardly keep up with him as I wrote the long list on the flip chart. When the page was full, I pointed to the extensive number of items and asked the couple, "Is that list a common set of values you can both work towards?" They both agreed it was, and that proved to be enough to nudge the couple to keep working toward a solution. After a few more sessions, the couple went their separate ways, got a divorce, and completed the ADR process. They felt a duty, if not to each other then at least to their children. They always negotiated in good faith and resolved their differences by going back to those values. At the end they felt they had approached a sense of justice for themselves and their children. Values help us to form an important foundation in life, yet I've come to realize that we tend to take a backward approach in our society. We're so concerned about our rights that we tend to push discussions about values to the back burner. As this story shows, focusing on rights and other legal issues gets us nowhere. Instead, I propose we begin by asking ourselves, what values do I wish to live by and are my actions consistent with those values? When we begin with that perspective, it's amazing how differently a problem can be understood and possibly resolved. They resolve their differences by going back to those values. Let me provide another vivid example of this principle at work. Two businessmen were in conflict over an issue related to whether a commission was payable on a commercial real estate leasing transaction. At stake was $100,000, which was a substantial amount of money at the time. At their request, I began talking to them informally about a process I had begun pursuing, which was pre-litigation mediation, or mediation before any court action is taken. I figured that in appropriate cases this would be a natural next step in cost-effective and mutually respectful problem-solving. Both parties had already spoken to their lawyers about commencing a lawsuit, so I spoke with both lawyers, who were understandably concerned about what impact this unfamiliar procedure would have on any future litigation. Everyone felt litigation was inevitable since the dispute seemed to come down to a win-lose zero-sum game outcome. Either the whole $100,000 was owed or none of it was. I wrote up a pre-litigation mediation agreement for everyone to consider, which was quite novel at the time. According to the ground rules we established, we agreed to a mutual fact-finding and law-finding mediation approach. As a lawyer I would do the legal research, and as a mediator I would give out legal information but not legal advice. The entire mediation process would be without prejudice, so nothing said or done could be used in court proceedings, but if no settlement resulted and litigation commenced, a claim and a counterclaim, it was expected that this joint first step would substantially reduce the cost for the pleadings, examinations for discovery and trial, if it went that far. There was pressure around those two business people from their associates, families and friends on how to deal with the circumstance. That is not unlike any dispute, when everyone around you has an opinion, so there is a tendency to appease many other interests and points of view before making a decision. Each party had been told by his lawyer that it would cost $25,000 to commence the court action and take it through all the procedural steps before trial, and it would cost another $25,000 for the trial itself. In other words, for the $100,000 at stake, each party was prepared to spend $50,000 for a win or lose outcome, knowing that the winner could also be ordered to pay to the loser substantial legal costs. Of course, after the trial there would always be the possibility that one of the parties would appeal the judge's decision, leading to even more legal costs and time delays. In contrast to the very costly trial option, for the pre-litigation mediation we agreed to a fee of only $5,000, or $2,500 each. This relatively low sum would also save on future legal costs if there were no settlement, since so much legal research would already be done. Both court lawyers, the barristers, agreed to this process, but no one really felt a solution was possible. After a few weeks my report was done, but, alas, despite their best efforts in the mediation they could not find any middle ground. Both parties thanked me for my attempt, and neither felt the mediation exercise had been a waste of time or money, although many around them had hoped to avoid a public conflict between these well-known and highly regarded businessmen. The court lawyers expressed gratitude for what they termed the failed effort, but in reality they were probably grateful they could finally get on with the litigation. I recollect that this happened on a Thursday and that the litigation was set to begin the following Monday. After they left my office I spent some time reflecting about the failed effort, and I recalled the line from Rudyard Kipling's poem If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. From the beginning of my ADR journey I had determined that in mediation it's impossible to think in terms of triumph success or disaster failure, because it's impossible to know what will result from the mediation over time. I've had many tough experiences that verify that. As I was mulling over the situation, it occurred to me that although we had looked at the law, I had neglected to ask one vital question. I called the first gentleman and asked if I could see him briefly that afternoon. He questioned whether another meeting would make any difference, but when I told him I needed to ask him an important question, he kindly consented. "I'm very curious to know what question you feel you need to ask," he said when I met him a short time later in his boardroom. "My question is this: what value system do you live by? What informs your decision-making in your personal and business life? And do you believe you are applying that value system to this situation?" He excused himself for a few minutes and returned with a text from the Torah, the sacred scriptures of Judaism. He read the words in Hebrew from Deuteronomy 16:20 and explained that he interpreted the meaning as righteousness, righteousness. When I asked him what that meant, he replied, "Well, Ernie, it essentially means that whatever I do must be righteous not only for me but also for those in the community." Can community include the other person you are in dispute with, and in our own community? I asked. Of course, he replied. So I continued, do you think that the decision to proceed to litigation fits both levels of righteousness? I don't know, he replied. I haven't thought about it that way. Let me think about it and I'll get back to you. I was appreciative and told him I was planning to call the other party and ask the same question. When I called the other gentleman and explained what had just transpired, even before I could ask my question, he said, "We Christians have our own value system too. I can go to the Bible and read what Jesus taught." He later called back and said he had just read the exhortation in Philippians 2:4 to look out not only for your own interests, but also for the interests of others. I had done all I could and the next move was up to them. I went home comforted that there was still some thinking going on. As the saying goes, if they're talking, at least they're not fighting. I had no idea what the outcome would be, but as a neutral intervener I'd learned to have a sincere indifference to the outcome. In my heart I secretly hoped something would come of this last attempt, but I had to remind myself that I had done all I could and the next move was up to them. The next day, to my pleasant surprise, I heard back from both parties. Each called to say he was prepared to resume our discussion that day to see if litigation could be avoided. However, this was now Friday, and with litigation set to begin the following Monday we were down to the wire. The details of the final discussion aren't important, nor do I even remember them. What I do remember is that before sunset that Friday, before the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath, they were successful in reaching an agreement, which they signed. I commended both of them for doing something spectacular, not only for themselves but also for the mediation process, by introducing values as a core part of the dialogue. If you're wondering, that Friday afternoon I did speak with both lawyers, who had to review the agreement to ensure both parties obtained independent legal advice before signing. Both lawyers said they were pleased for their respective clients, but knowing how much money those lawyers would have earned through litigation, I wondered how they really felt. Some lessons. Whenever you have reached an impasse, try to see the situation from a different angle. A deadlock doesn't have to mean a dead end. To break the deadlock, step back from the issues and see how your own values or sense of purpose in life can help move past the impasse. No matter how many bumps you encounter on the road to a solution or reconciliation, keep going and don't be afraid to try a different route. Remember that when you use a GPS, it offers alternative routes and will recalculate your route if you turn a different way. To reach a solution or a reconciliation, you may need to adopt that same GPS approach. To find the best route to your destination, let your values or the principles that you believe in guide your way to help get past any confusion, doubts, or fears. Get involved in resolving others' issues only if you are invited, and once invited, keep going until you are asked to stop, even if the disputants stop moving. Try giving them a nudge. Make sure the values you bring to the table are not compromised. Whatever you are doing, saying or thinking, check yourself out to see if it resonates with your values. I heard about a delivery boy who called his supervisor, pretending he was a potential customer, and asked if the delivery person was reliable. When asked why, he said, "I wanted to check up on myself." One of the guests on my ADR radio show told me about an exercise in which you pick 3 core values that describe your life, and then measure all that you do against them.